Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here with Todd Rawson from TechDemocracy. I'm Brooke Lovett from SecureAuth, and we're going to go over getting ahead of the 5 CIAM pitfalls. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, and let's talk about what CIAM is for those of you who are not familiar with the subject. I'm sure you all are, and why it matters. So customer identity and access management is essentially how we register, authenticate, and interact securely with our digital products and services, right? We do this every day. You do it with your bank, you do it with your providers that you buy things from, like Amazon, you do it with social media sites, you do it with almost everything that you interact with from a digital perspective. Now, why is it important from a business perspective? There's a lot of reasons. The main ones are that it protects you, the customer, from data and to protects your data and privacy from leakage. But as a business owner, it actually protects your customers and then protects you from the ensuing litigation, which is very important. You want to power frictionless user experiences, right? If you want to have satisfied customers and you want to have customers who come back and enjoy using your systems, then you need to have, frictionless experiences. And you need to enable models of business, which are very common today, such as B2B models, franchise models, and multi-brand models, right? We're in a time of great consolidation now. A lot of businesses are buying other businesses. You have partner distribution frameworks, you have supply chain distribution frameworks, or many other different mechanisms that we use to create kind of the mesh of pieces that we use to bring products from the material form to out to market. We have to be able to manage these different brands and manage users across those brands. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, you need to be able to grow your business, and you need to be able to grow it in a way that's secure. And in order to be secure, it has to scale with demand. So let's talk about what the actual landscape looks like. So in today's landscape, you generally start with your direct consumer. Now, your direct consumer is often and historically been interacting with a web property of some kind, like a website, which obviously is a browser running on the computer, talking to servers. Now, in addition to this, we have mobile apps, and the mobile apps separate the client from the server in a certain way, right? So we now have this kind of native application. There's a slightly different experience there. More and more, the web applications are becoming, unified with mobile applications, but there is, a separate set of security implications and so on. Additionally, we have in-store experiences, and from an increasing, omni-channel perspective, our customers, your vendors, right, or businesses in general that are implementing CIAM want to be able to provide unified experiences across these channels. So there's a few things to point out here. One is the unified experience, right, across each of the channels. The other is that experience, which is unified, needs to be as frictionless as possible, right? We want to have a passwordless journey. We want to use things like passkeys. We want to keep people away from having to go through complex password reset flows. And generally speaking, experiences that are driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning risk platforms will be able to dynamically increase and decrease that risk or that friction along with risk. Now, when you're doing an in-person payment authorization, you might think, okay, well, this is a cash transaction or a credit card, but increasingly you need to be able to scan your app or something like that in order to bring your loyalty points into the equation and that sort of thing. So there is, from an omni-channel perspective, an in-person element to this. And lastly, because of the difference between the mobile app and the web property, we have these requirements for SDKs and different passwordless flows that can use the mobile frameworks. There's extra things we can do here. For example, you can do a push notification to a mobile phone that's network enabled. You can also enable greater or richer user experiences on mobile apps where they can actually run, in the background and do things kind of in the forefront. So this is the basic setup. Now, what we need to add into the mix here, of course, is the ability to sign in with third parties, right? So here we have digital verifiable credentials from various places. Increasingly, this will come from the government and so on. We have social media, we have nationalized ID, we have decentralized identity providers, right? We need to be able to sign these people in as direct consumers, even if the identity is not asserted directly by that consumer. Now, once you make place your order via these servers, if you're ordering a physical good, then maybe that needs to be sent to some fulfillment center, right? When you order something from Amazon or, one of these actual brick and mortar delivery services has to send you something, right? And they put it on a truck and they send it to you. But there's also software products, and these software products need to be ordered and fulfilled via APIs, and the vendors might come from all over the place. So there's API interactions that happen there. And what we find is that patterns for zero trust and API infrastructure become better and easier to manage here when they're open. So it's really important that we include this in kind of the CIAM discussion. And lastly, we have indirect customers. Now, indirect customers behave a lot like direct customers. Of course, they want to buy products, but they buy them through third-party channels, through partners, and so on. And what that means is that you need the ability to delegate and manage subtenancy for these complex ecosystems. So now we have a very busy picture where we started with something very similar or very small, but the concepts are similar. All right, so where do people struggle? Even when you check all the boxes and you understand what we're doing here, you end up in a situation where you need to be careful of these common pitfalls, right? You can have a great POC and a great user experience in test, but a really painful rollout. You can have something that's extremely secure and it passes all of the tests as far as pen testing and that sort of thing, but it becomes unstable under load and therefore goes down and is not safe for your business. And then you can have something that seems to be scaling, but then when you launch globally, it falls over because you haven't considered, the hotspots or the geographic distribution. This is why we need to think of CIAM as something that is foundational infrastructure rather than just a feature of an infrastructure. So today we're going to talk about the top 5 pitfalls that sabotage these rollouts. And as we move forward and kind of dig into what these pitfalls are, afterward we'll be handing it off to Todd to talk to us about how they can help you assess and figure out where your pain points are going to be before you actually hit them, which gives you kind of foresight and the ability to look around corners. So let's just go through them quickly. The first pitfall is the UX versus security dilemma, right? The idea here is that if you increase friction too high to increase security, you're going to have people dropping off and they're not going to buy the product, they're not going to proceed with the journey, or they're going to bypass the controls. The business risk here, obviously, is the increased risk of fraud because people are going to try to bypass the controls or just lost conversions, right? Bad business. The next one is integration complexity. So this is where we fail to take into account the legacy, hybrid, and other mechanisms that the apps are integrating with, and essentially overlook the complexity of the environment in which we're operating, right? And what happens here is it ends up just delaying the project, right? Something that was scheduled to be very small can be understaffed time, and you have overruns, oversights, things that don't work properly, incomplete implementations, and so on. The third one is delegated administration. Generally speaking, every business in some way operates with partners or through partners to get their product to market, right? There's very few businesses out there in the world that take raw earth elements, turn them into a product, and sell them directly to a customer. This generally doesn't happen. You're buying parts from suppliers, you're selling your goods to distributors, and you need to be able to interact with these different partners at different levels. Centralizing that IT management for every user that touches your product or service is not an efficient way to do this. It causes operational bottlenecks, it causes friction on the partner channel. It makes it so it's difficult for everybody to make money and everybody to move quickly in this landscape. The fourth one is failing under scale. So here we're talking about spikes in logins. For example, maybe you drop a hot new product or there's an advertising campaign that starts. Latency can be caused by these, but also downtime and outages if you overload the system and cause kind of a denial of service. Obviously here, these are moments when you stand to make the most revenue, right? These are peak moments and your brand can be damaged and also you're losing that cash that you're not selling during that time. And then finally, we have the set and forget CIAM project. So this is a very common one. The plan is, here is short-sighted. It's, hey, we need to implement this. We need these features. And then when it's done, they walk away, right? There's no plan to adapt to the new risks, the changing UX needs of the users or of the business, and or regulations that might be imposed. So here we have compliance drift. We have technical debt that accumulates. And if you don't pay attention to it and you don't continue to treat this as an ongoing program, you can get into trouble. All right, so that's the overview. Let's start and dig in on the first one just for a couple of minutes. The first pitfall, ignoring UX in favor of security, or vice versa. It creates what we think of as a false trade-off, right? We don't want to be thinking of it in terms of secure or usable. What we find is that dev and product teams want things to be fast and seamless, and security teams want to reduce risk. And therefore they add more controls. And these things are at odds with each other in general, right? So it's like secure or usable. But we don't want this to be a binary choice. We want this to be kind of a slider or a dial, right? So when we think of this in terms of, risk, we can say, okay, as the risk becomes higher, we want the friction to become more. And if we can dynamically assess risk, then we can simultaneously deliver a great UX and strong security. So you can see here on the graphic, we have, an invisible login or very smooth, zero friction login in a situation where you have trusted behavior or known behavior. A mild challenge, such as, hey, use your passkey, put your fingerprint on the reader, that kind of thing, for a new device or something where you're accessing the system from a different location. And then if you're doing something high risk, like changing your password or spending a lot of money, then we might want to do something, like step you up to another factor and do something more invasive. So pretty easy to get past. I think most implementations now at least think about this, but they don't all have a good way of being dynamic about it. The second pitfall, underestimating your real world integration, is to think of this in terms of, it's a backbone, right? Your CIAM system needs to be something that you're building upon, not something that you're plugging into an existing system. Your decisions about how the system is architected are going to affect every login, every API call, and every app that you connect to. So when you're doing these demos and you have something that's kludged together, this is not the real world scenario, right? You're going to lack, insight about your legacy identity systems, the various other identity systems that users are using to sign in, like Facebook and things like that. Multi-cloud environments, redundancy built into having some deployment in AWS and another in Azure or something like that. Hybrid architectures where maybe some of your infrastructure is running on-prem and you have, MPLS circuits that connect these two things together, right? Things that you don't really think about these days very often. And also you could have dozens or even hundreds of applications. Now in CIAM, we tend to think of the application as the one that the user is using, right? It's the thing that the user's actually operating on. But in general, there are lots of smaller applications that make these systems up. They perform the ordering, they do all sorts of interesting things. And it's really important to make sure that we're understanding the environment before we're putting in a backbone system like this. So our point of view on this is that we want to orchestrate and use an API first integration pattern that will be scalable and flexible so that you can achieve what you need to in the real world and you can maintain it. Now, what this looks like in practice is generally that you need to be able to support identity from really any vendor or any provider, including social media providers or incumbent providers or other parts of your business. You need to use open standards where possible to get the information from those identity providers. You need to orchestrate the UX by using your tooling for consent, for policy management, for fine-grained authorization, for storage of identity information and just-in-time provisioning, and all of your device fingerprinting, risk assessments. And then you provide that information, again, via open standards to the range of applications that you need to interact with. This can include web applications or direct use APIs and services, legacy applications, and connected devices and vehicles and things like that. So the idea here is that you can change your logic in the UX layer or the identity layer without rewriting the code of the applications. You can integrate once and then you can adapt centrally and adapt endlessly. All right, pitfall 3. The bottleneck here, as I said, is usually stemming from the fact that businesses fail to take into consideration the ecosystem in which they operate, right? So the real world complexity of this is that you have multiple brands, potentially partners and business units that are all operating together. If the industry or if the enterprise is a monolith, then this would work, but generally they're not, right? They're ecosystems of these things, and these franchises and subsidiaries and so on need to be kind of able to operate within the same ecosystem. So the bottleneck comes when you have a central IT organization that's trying to manage groups and policies and configurations and things like that. And it slows down not only onboarding your customers and partners, but also getting updates and compliance out. So the advantage here to using a system that's mature in this area is that you can delegate your administration for scoped, areas of the business or scoped areas of the CIAM system so that your partners and your business unit owners and your brand owners can actually control the pieces that are inside of their purview. The granularity of that control, is up to the individual partner and up to the individual business, but the sphere of that control is something that's controlled by, kind of the hierarchy of how the business is put together. And last, and probably most importantly, you need to be able to allow those individual brands to own their brand, right? You need to be able to present a screen to the end user that's going to actually show what you want to show. So the way this is generally approached is through subtenancy. So you can have information flowing in multiple different directions. So here in this little tree here that's turned on its side, you can see a business, it has enterprise customers, they have sub brands, and this recursive model is used so that you can get information to the users that comes from one or more of the higher points in this tree. So for example, if the user is interacting with a sub brand, they can still derive services from this node or this node, and the user themselves can sign in across this set of items. Now, what won't happen though is that this user can't sign in to sub brand 1 from this location because he's stored at sub brand 2. So this level of recursion gives us the ability to kind of map that out. Each of these bubbles actually includes all the things at the bottom. That's a set of users or multiple sets of users, its own subtenants, the ability to interact with other IDPs, multi-factor and policy-based access control, and branding, right, for each one of them so that they're all different, or they can all be different. Okay, number 4, failing when it matters most. So, the looks good in testing trap happens all the time, right? We think we can build things to scale, but you have to actually test them, right? There's tools out there for this. We've all load tested systems before. It's really important that you're not only load testing, but you're testing for load on failure conditions. What happens if there's an error condition and that error causes millions and millions of retries, right? Are you rate limiting? Are you protecting some of your customers from other customers? There's all kinds of things that can go wrong here. You have to do real trials in production, and you have to load test frequently before you roll out and after any changes or before any major, marketing events and things like that. It's really important to think about this in terms of uptime across multiple regions. You want to be looking at, how is it architected? Are you using security models and DevSecOps models and, compliance frameworks that are in line with best practices? This is the kind of thing that Todd will be talking about in a moment here, how you actually kind of analyze this type of thing. And then we have the set and forget pitfall. So this is the one where we think it's a one-time project, right? They deploy CIAM, they check the box, they move on. What changes is that the threats are changing, right? The threat landscape is constantly changing. UX norms are changing. The mechanisms we use for profiling, for sign-in, the regulations are changing. Sometimes they're getting more strict, sometimes they're getting less. The idea here is that your maturity model needs to show you need to be moving upward along that maturity model. It needs to show growth all the time. So when you look at a maturity model like this, and this is a very simple rendition, right? There's a more specific model that you'll see later in the presentation. You have like basic login and foundational items that you can do. Then you have integrated UX, and then you have the ability to start adapting, right? And when you adapt, this is where we can start to reduce friction. You want to be able to then think about continuous authorization. Are you able to continually check that the user's context hasn't changed? They haven't moved locations, or they're not traveling in excess of 300 kilometers per hour or something like that. And then you need to be able to also enable strategic projects, and you need CIAM to be an enabler for your entire digital business, not just something that has to be done for individual projects. All right, so let's go back through those pitfalls, right? We've got UX versus security, the impact, drop-offs, poor conversions, right? The advantage that we're offering here from a product perspective is the ability to do adaptive auth. We've got risk engine, we've got UX control. This is the stuff that allows you to eliminate friction where you don't need it. We've got integration complexity, where the impact is broken journeys and delays in integrations and implementations. An orchestrated API first design gets you past this. Centralized administration, you get rid of your IT bottlenecks and you get back that agility with delegated administration and scoped spheres of management. Failures at scale cause outages and lost revenue, and we get past those with elastic performance and real world trials and tests. And then the one-time project where you get security drift and compliance risk can be eliminated through a mature model and run state planning. So again, it is not a project, but it's a program, right? So we want to be tactical. We want to be strategic. We want to align identity with the evolving needs of the business. We want to be able to transition from a reactive risk mitigation strategy to a proactive enablement strategy. And we want identity to become part of the digital product design, not just the security plumbing that enables it. So the question becomes, how mature is your CIAM program? And with this, I will hand it over to Todd, who will help us understand how we perform CIAM strategic assessments.
Great. Thank you, Brooke. All right, folks. So on that note, hopefully everybody can hear me fine. I'm going to share this presentation. One moment. All right. So how do we ensure the win? When we're talking into the weeds and into the details, we need at some point to be able to take a step back and say, okay, how are we now going to approach this? And what ends up happening is the majority of the organizations that we speak to out there haven't gone through sort of we'll call it a bit of a sanity check, a process and an assessment in order to make sure that they're going to be successful when they actually run down this path. And the rationale I can bring to that is simply, we go to an organization and the process, whether it be registration of their consumer base, the ability to, let's say, opt in or opt out or collect data about their profile, or even being good stewards of the data itself. The organizations tend to break down when their processes or their data is already in bad shape. And what I mean is, if the process right now, from an onboarding perspective of resources, is they're going A to B to C, they're dropping down to N, they're coming back up to E, skipping D altogether, their processes are already broken. And what ends up happening is, in order to correct it, we tend to find that depending on that backend application and their processes and procedures, they may be all over the map, because from a support perspective, this is how Todd's doing it. We'll call it asterisks, and double asterisks. This is how Brooke's doing it, because we haven't corrected these processes, which leads to bad identity data, bad governance around these processes, procedures, etc. So that when they go for the technology to either speed it up or even from a fix perspective, they get a fast version of these broken processes and what amounts then to bad data. So a process to make sure that all of these things are aligned will only allow us to be successful in the end. And organizations, I can tell you from our perspective, that have run through this process, their success rate has gone through the roof. And that's where the importance is. There's too many failed projects that go on because there is no understanding of what they're looking for at the end of the day. It's just from a high level, or the expectations from management don't get fulfilled. And the worst thing that can happen is somebody says, that's not what I was expecting. They're going to blame your vendor, they're going to blame your integrator, and eventually they're going to blame you. So highly recommend you take a look at this process, get a good understanding of it, and then we'll talk more. So first, there we go. What are the steps that we need to determine the what, where, when, why, and how? Because we need to understand, what is it we truly need to focus on? Where should we be focusing? When are we going to succeed? Why do we need to do maintenance, support, etc. versus, oh, it'll be fine on its own? And then realistically, how much is this going to cost, not just to run, but how to do the care and feeding over time? So what you're going to hear from me is a little more on the high level side, obviously, as we've gone into the weeds, but there is some method to this madness. So, all right, are we even positioned for successful implementation, change, or fix? Because realistically, if you're going to go down this secure auth track and you haven't done these steps, you're going to get mad at them thinking it was their fault, but it's your fault. Because do you even know what you're trying to fix? Do you even know what are those requirements? And they're going to love you if you run this process, by the way, because it's going to be successful and you're going to say, these guys are the greatest thing I've ever seen. So it's going to benefit you, it's going to benefit them, it's going to benefit your integrator, it's going to benefit everybody. Now, this interesting about this process is it applies to the workforce side as well as CIAM, just slight variations and changes, but it also applies to pretty much anything you run in IT. So first, from a CMMI model, too many of the organizations we go to, look, their governance is ad hoc, it's informal. Different responsibilities fall on different folks. We get a lot of orgs out there that CIAM is being thrown on the guys who do the workforce CIAM on their plate, and they're a little bit like deer in the headlights because it is a different animal. And funny enough, I tend to find the CIAM side of the house, it looks more complicated, but it tends to be easier because the variations, they tend not to be as deep or as many. The key, of course, is you don't want to mess with the customer. You want to make sure, as Brooke alluded to, it's got to be frictionless, right? Frictionless. It's got to be clean. It's got to be easy to use. It's got to not mess with them. And that's where the fear tends to come in. But those processes, those procedures tend to be much more higher level, which is a good thing because this is all very doable. However, if we're doing this on sort of a piecemeal basis, we run into this headache. Things, us as drivers, they're driven by the business. We end up with redundant technology. We got three tools that do the same thing. We're getting maybe 10, 20% of the value out of each one of them, as opposed to having one single tool in the organization that has managed to, fulfill 80%, 90%, 100% of the use cases. So in order to get around this, we need to define this better. We need to start with understanding, what does this look like? What's the vision? Have we built a governance structure around it so that as we progress in the future, not just from a project or programmatic standpoint, we're on top of things, but even once this is at operation level, we can maintain it without the fear of it going down, without the fear of doing upgrades, whether the upgrades are on us or from our vendor. So we try to eliminate that fear as best as we can. And the reason is, when we look at these first two phases, we'll say the levels, we will get pushed by the organization. What's the ROI? And I usually, when we've had a big enough crowd asked, how do you see ROI? And they all come back, well, ROI is return on investment, and they can go spout off. But guess what? A lot of this is risk management at the same time. There are return on investment that comes out of this, but from a risk management standpoint, our ROI includes risk of incarceration. And I say that because we have to lock down this data. We have to make sure that what we're saying is true, that we are not just good stewards of the data, but we are protecting this from threats and that we can prove it to the auditors at the end of the day, which I will get to. So once we've done this, we're in good shape. We've got a vision. We've determined all of this. Everybody's on board. The proper stakeholders are informed. We start running this. Things are going wonderful. The CIAM architecture, it's aligning from an enterprise perspective. The stakeholders are happy. We get to 5, and everything's gone well, and it's continuing to go well. Guess what? You need to go back and rerun this process again. I say this because let's say we built a 3-year roadmap out of this, where we need to get to. And some of these pieces are maybe months, takes a couple months to put in place, maybe 6 months, however it may be. If we're not constantly reevaluating, I say constantly, but every few years reevaluating, we run into some big headaches. Because every 36 months, everything in what we're doing here in CIAM and in IAM has changed, along with cybersecurity as a general. 3 years ago, nobody was talking about AI. Before that, the big ticket item was, immutable ledgers and the like. And you can go 3 years before that, and every 3 years you'll see the next cycle comes up. You can kind of thank Gartners of the world because they kind of have to come up with the next latest and greatest, like NHI, which is technically in a way been around for a long time, but has expanded now with AI and agentic AI and the like, which will be our next webinar, by the way. Having said that, make sure we reevaluate every few years. It should be much easier. And we're gonna, my last slide when I get to it here is about that process. And it's a single slide model that's gonna kind of clarify all of this and wrap everything up in a nice, cozy little bow. All right, so are we focusing on the right things? So we like to call this one here our jellyfish. And here's the thing. We want to make sure that the right customers are getting access to the right resources at the right time for the right reasons and that we can prove it. I like to tell people, look, if I can't tell you that it was Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the library, it doesn't matter if it's working or not. We have to be able to prove it. If we fail that piece, we are going to fail audit, even if everything seems like it's working. Because if we don't understand that it's working, we have a problem. If you're getting to your SIM solution, for example, I like to bring this one up, notifications, and those notifications get ignored, then what good was the technology to begin with? we're not actually doing anything with it. We want to make sure that we don't just leave it to its own devices. It's kind of like a mall security guard who's sitting on a chair and somebody runs by with something they stole and they go, stop, but they never get out of the chair. So we have to make sure that we're following this perspective, that we are on top of everything, including the intelligence, which I will get to. So we look at a jellyfish, it's pretty straightforward, right? We got consumer identity, includes different methods of registration, how we identify people, verify, etc. You got profile and consent management, which tends to be very regulatory driven, where you have to make sure that, you got the Todd Rawson, that's the right Todd Rawson seeing the data, but also that from a profile perspective, I tell you, this is what I allow you to do. I opt in, I opt out. I want to be able to see what you're doing with my data when I need to. I need to make those requests. And from a legal and regulatory constraints, all of these apply, which gets us to threat detection and prevention, the third key piece, which is, are we being good stewards of that data? Are we protecting it? Are we making sure that we are proactive in this? We can't just be detective. We have to be preventative in nature. So it has to be both. Detection is, to my belief, we've screwed up if something shows there because we weren't preventative. We didn't stop it before it happened. So we have to make sure that we understand that. But here's the thing about a jellyfish. Pretty easy when you look at it from the top down, but then, you turn it on its side and there's a whole bunch of tendrils. And this isn't even everything, but I wanted to make sure you could see it on the screen. So when we look at this, you'll see things such as registration as a service, the profile verification and its subcomponents, consumer identity lifecycle management, the secure single sign-on, consumer data security and the protections around it, API security and management, self-service profile management, all things I kind of briefly touched upon here. This isn't even everything we have to go over. We want to make sure in some cases these are checkbox items, and others we may have to go deeper. So when we're assessing, we have to know what it is we need to assess. And you'll see from that top level, the B1 organization model, which I'll get into shortly, the be good stewards of the customer data I stated, and know your customer. I'll explain what those three and how they apply here. Here's the other thing about jellyfish. They can sting you. It goes without saying. I don't even need to go into the details, but also these days with AI, they've got these little guys swimming around them, and you have to be aware because AI is everywhere, and AI is going to be intricate as we move forward to everything from onboarding, answering questions, managing systems and servers, doing all the stuff on the back end. The other thing about jellyfish, they make little jellyfish. Here's the thing, guys, with the little jellyfish. So these are just some of the examples. We could probably create, 50 of these and keep going. So I threw a couple in here, everything from consumer-focused compliance, including all those worldwide regulations we have to manage to the points that Brooke made, including things like that frictionless onboarding experience. All of these things we have to make sure that we've not just identified, but that we're covering when we talk about assessments. And that may include regionally driven standards and compliance. It could be zero trust services and how we're going to make sure with all the big words that you see there that we're managing to this model, a fail deny model that hopefully isn't stopping our user base in any way, shape, or form, and how to get there in between. So now comes the big part. How do we do this? Well, again, there's three core pieces there. The first was, how do we present as one organization? If we have, for example, a front end that looks really pretty and we've got 20 different applications using different technologies on the back end, we want to make sure that front end shows us as a singular organization, that they're not going from a friction standpoint and having to restart on multiple back end applications and all of the rigmarole that's going to come into it. Because the more difficult you're going to make it on your customer base, the less likely they're to use it, and that's going to cost you time and money. We want to get out of that. So we need to, I realize some of these are a little bit of a repeat of what you saw from Brooke as well. Reduce that overhead and complexity. Make sure that registrations are validated at a minimum, but we have to support that model without causing friction again. And that's where secure auth comes in. Allow the consumer to centrally control consent, improve their UI or UX, excuse me, through what is hopefully a single set of credentials, and allow for the fast deployment of new forms of authentication as things change, making sure that we're keeping up with the times, to make everybody's life easier. Second being know your customer. You have to make sure, again, that as stated, you got the right Brooke, you got the right Todd, because the worst thing that can happen is the wrong Todd gets access to that data and the fines and headaches that come out of that, as well as our brand awareness and brand name takes a major hit out in the market. And last thing we want to do is end up in the news. Making sure that we're constantly in an improvement mode. I realize these cross over with the last one you saw. We have to make sure that any changes that we're doing are fast and furious, like the movie. We have to deploy these changes very quickly to not interrupt the user's interactions, and we have to make it simple. What's the old model? KISS, they call it, keep it simple, stupid. We want to make sure that our compliance with these regulations is done easily, that it's fast, that it's simple, and that we're not hurting our user base in the process. Last but not least on this, how to be good stewards of said customer data. Look, we want to make sure that while we're making it simple from an authentication and registration process, it must be as secure as it gets. Now, there's all kinds of best practices here, and best practices tend to be in the eye of the beholder. But we want to make sure that whatever we're putting in is simple, that it is secure, and that I say simple means ease of use for our end user. We want to make sure that that API application layer, they are secure as well. Again, being a good customer data steward means that we are validating, we're verifying, we're doing everything we need to on the back end to make sure at the same time that the right people have the right access at the right time for the right reason. And as stated, that we can prove it. All right. You'll notice in that third bullet, through data access governance is how we're going to secure customer data and data encryption in every state, every aspect of that data. We don't want to allow any openings for bad actors throughout the entire process, whether they are external, internal, or a mix in between. And that we are making sure that all of those access logs, that they are going through an analysis process. Just go back to my model of the mall security guard. If we're seeing errors and nobody is doing anything about it, we're doing something pretty wrong there. So again, I realize I kept this at a higher level than what you saw earlier, but there's a reason, because now I want to get into how are we going to succeed in these processes. And I'm almost there. This is the last core slide I need to show everybody. All right, so it's really a three-stage process, as stated before. One, what does the organization need? Very important. You're going to need to talk with the stakeholders to the business, make sure you're getting all of this documented, because again, if you're not doing this, at the end of the day, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to go, well, that's not what we wanted. And then heads are going to start to roll. So what does the org need? But what do we need for the customers as well, again, to make sure that we're not causing any friction? What processes are working today? We talked about that A to B to C, dropping down to N, coming back up to E, skipping D altogether. What's working today? What's not working today? Do we have those updated? Are they even documented? Because if your documentation is 10 years old on this stuff, guess what? You got garbage documentation, and garbage in will be garbage out. If that's what we're following when we're putting in solutions, again, wonderful. We bought the technology and we got a fast version of broken processes and lousy data. All right. Analyze this. Take this information and say, okay, here's what it means to the organization. If we get into the details now, we can correct anybody internal from an education standpoint and make sure that they understand what is the real process going on. We go into so many organizations where what we find out is group A is doing it this way, group B is doing it this way. And by the way, there should be a C because that's how it's supposed to be done right now. And that's where the disconnect is. So you can educate based on this documentation. You take this, get an understanding of what is downstream, what is coming up that's going to impact this, what are the in-flight projects, what are the in-flight operations, etc. Now we can build out that list and say, okay, well, what are the requirements, which we're going to get into in a moment, but what are the requirements to mitigate these? But prior to that, even, what are the costs of doing nothing? Define the risks. Guess what? They may be operational, they may be security related, they may be financial. That's where you're going to find out your multiple ROIs, your risk of incarceration for your return on investment. You're going to be able to get an understanding of those. So make sure that you document the risks. Some may be acceptable to the org. We sign off, we're good to go. Others we have to dig in deeper and we'll take immediate action on. So everything else might be somewhere in the middle. So we're going to look at those risks, and they may be as simple as defining a high, medium, low. Now we build the requirements to mitigate these. If you have a good BA that knows what they're doing, pay them, because finding a good BA is sometimes hard. And I got to tell you, if you can get these requirements built out, you are going to have everything you need to test against. And too many times requirements are make this thing faster. That's not a requirement, that's a wish list. If you're saying I need to reduce onboarding time from what is now taking, I don't know, 2 weeks or a week to get a customer's account online, it needs to be seconds. We can write that a little sharper, and we've got an actual requirement to test this again when we put the solution in place. All right. Now that we've got those requirements, we can build out the reference architectures to complete this. Look, you don't have enough time, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough resources. We know those are the big constraints that organizations deal with. Pretend they don't exist right now. We'll put them back in, I promise. The reason is this: we're going to build out all of these future state architectures. What do I mean is you're going to take the requirements and in ideal state, this is what it all needs to look like. Build the Visios out. Make sure everybody's on board. They get an understanding of the reference architectures. They agree with the reference architectures, which leads us to a true gap analysis. Issue, requirement, where we are today, where we're going to be tomorrow. We can now take that and we can apply those constraints again. Okay, we know we don't have enough time, money, resources. Now we roadmap this thing out. So we build out a swim lane model usually, right, for each individual piece and timelines. And here's what we're going to do in, phase 0, which might be cleanup or prep steps, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Keep those phases tight. I always say in the larger scale, when we're talking about the workforce side, nothing more than 6 months, even if you have monthly releases and an agile method with 6 individuals, that goes much quicker when we're talking about CIAM. The entire thing might be looking like 6 months in total, or a year in your roadmap, depending on what you're looking for. That includes, your testing in your environments and more testing and then more testing, because this is going live at the customer. But build out those swim lanes properly. Make sure that you're showing wins, because your management is not going to open up the budget for phase 2 or phase 3 if you're not showing those quick timeline wins. Okay. Build out the project plans behind them, the constraints, the dependencies, the timelines to get it done. Look, how is the model going to look? Is it going from dev to test/QA to production? Granted, this may be, it's all from a SaaS perspective. Do I have access to test beds, etc., for the dev side? And all of that needs to get built into your project plans. What are the outputs and deliverables? We're very big on making sure you got documentation, so that at the end of the day, not only how long is this going to go for, why are you doing it to begin with? What are the resources required to get it done? The engineers, project managers, somebody from your, UX side for 10%, 20%, however much time, because now we can budget it based off of that. Figure out your internal and external rate at worst case scenario from a blended perspective. And guess what? If you add 20% for phase gate reviews, steering committees, and the like, what's going to happen at the end of the day is down to the penny exactly what you're going to need from a budget. All your homework is done. You get your business case, you get your requirements, you get your project plans, you get the grand vision. You can apply the governance to it. Now you can switch into what I like to call appendix mode, which is, look, do we have the technology? Do we need to go out to the secure alts and say, here's what I need to get done? Go out and say, here's the 1, 2, 3 things that I need, make sure that they can fit the use case. And at the end of the day, you're covered. And then how am I going to do the management of this once it's in production, the operational side? So the care and feeding, and make sure that you have that plan built out. And believe it or not, while this sounds more complicated than it is, it's a process you can run anything from days to weeks. If it's everything from an enterprise perspective, that might take a month or two. But at the end of the day, if you run this process, your success rate I can only tell you this from our 25 years of experience within this field and my own, that the success rate goes through the roof. I haven't had a failed project for organizations that have run this process. So I've got about 1 minute here, and then we go right into questions. So just us real quick, because somebody's always going to ask this question, I'm going to bypass it. Yes, we do this. We do this. It falls under our advisory side. We do systems integration for our partners, like just Secure Auth. We do managed services around it, back-end cybersecurity services, and a workforce as a service model, which is a play on staffing to bolster your operations. And if you reach out to me at the end, or reach out to any of us, we'll give you a copy of this deck, by the way, and there's extras in it. It's just where everything tends to fit together for us. We take a very NIST compliance type approach to it, regardless of where the organization lies, what country. And I'm leaving you with that, so that reach out and you can have a copy of this. You can get a copy of the Secure Auth deck as well. We'll make sure that everything gets out to you. And that includes if you're watching this now late in the game and you're watching this on repeat somewhere where we posted it. Feel free to reach out, todd.rawson@techdemocracy.com, or as you saw Brooke's information prior, we'll get all that stuff out to you, and that's a promise. So we're going to open this thing up for questions now. I'm going to stop sharing. And
it looks like we got a couple of write-in questions. The first one is, how do you see the role of ID verification evolving in CIAM in high-risk or regulated industries? So,
you want to go first?
yeah, I'll start on that one, I guess. So, I think if we're talking about identity verification in terms of knowing your customer, like in the beginning of a CIAM flow where you're registering a user and you're trying to figure out who they are, the way that we do this today mostly would be to use like a third-party service. So you have, MyTech, or you have Vouched or something like that, and you actually call out to this service, and you can do a number of things there. You can do document verification. We have the ability, for example, to do like a driver's license or passport verification against a government source. Like it would look it up against the available DMV data, make sure that it's legitimate, and then make you take a selfie that will do like a biometric match between your selfie that you just took and the picture on the driver's license. And when you take the selfie, it makes you open your mouth and turn your head and so on. So there's ways to kind of get past that validation. However, I think in the future, as things evolve here, we're going to be looking at hooking into other systems. If you look at the way this works in like Australia, for example, they have something called Connect ID, where it actually enables you to leverage identity that's already established elsewhere. So the example very quickly would be, if I go to open a mobile phone account with, I don't know, Telstra, I can use my Westpac identity and sign in with the bank, and they will kind of vouch for my identity. And using these kind of community-driven mechanisms as we move closer to like DVC and actually having centralized identity programs, I think is probably where it's going to go. So I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Well, mine is more about to add on from the regulatory standpoint. The one thing from an evolution is, as new standards come out and the latest and greatest technology, you're going to get pushed to adopt it. So with my CMMI slide, where I said you're going to constantly need to reevaluate and take a look every other year or so, the point being that there will be, and this is the one constant, sort of like death and taxes, there will be another regulation and there will be another technology or standard that we are going to be forced to utilize. We just have no choice. So constantly be learning.
Exactly. Okay, so next one is how to approach CIAM in an M&A environment where customer identity systems are fragmented across multiple acquired entities. You want to start on that one?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that, funny enough, I just did a speaking track on this one at Identiverse last week, specific to M&A. And we can go into some of those use cases, but it would probably, I was going to ask you probably to reach out to us afterwards. However, I can tell you that basically utilizing some sort of, we'll call it middleman, whether that's a virtual directory or some other application, in order to map and be able to sync up across multiple systems, or publish views that can be used by an authentication and authorization product, or models that we've used for M&A that have been very successful for us, even as it tends to be we'll call it a point in time solution that you're not going to have to keep forever, but in order to make sure that everything is kept in sync as well, until you're ready to start decommissioning some of those other systems, usually from the organization that you've acquired, unless their technology is better and you decide to get rid of your own, which is done seldomly, but is done. Those tend to be where and how our organization has seen management, not the only way, but has allowed us to um, uh, basically publish views as needed to
Yeah.
overcome the fragmentation. And there's other methods, but I'll let Brooke jump in as well.
Yeah, so I mean, overcoming the fragmentation is like the end state you want to get to, but there's like this middle ground. It takes a long time to absorb a company. Like if you have even for us, like we're not that big, but when we acquire a company, it takes months to kind of absorb them in their processes and their customers. And the customers expect a certain experience. And so I think what's important here is making sure that in that interim state, you have a mechanism that'll allow you to intelligently select like what experience to put people through. Like so we can, based on the user who's signing in, perform a lookup on where they came from or what they're subscribed to, and then send them down a familiar path. Slowly, you can change that and get to the point that you're talking about. But I think that initially, right, the ability to kind of use the building blocks is really important, and I think that that's something that you can use to kind of smooth things out from during the M&A process. Particularly when you have one brand absorbing another brand, right? You might not want to erase that brand. You have you want to keep that brand capital, right? So you want to present that brand screen and so on. So I think that's actually a pretty good question. So the next one is, what can help me make the argument to leadership that we need to move to vendor provided CIAM from our homegrown solution? We're currently lacking agility and professionalism. So I guess I'll start on that one. So there's there's a lot of reasons. Obviously, this is the business we're in, so I have a bias, but there's a lot of reasons to do it. One of them is simply the cost of ownership. You can do an analysis of what you're actually spending to maintain your existing homegrown solution, and it's almost definitely going to be more than subscribing to a service and managing that service for multiple reasons. I mean, one, for a fixed fee, you're going to be able to get 4 nines of uptime. You're getting resiliency. You're getting SOC 2 and ISO compliance. And if you don't get those things, like if the 4 nines of uptime aren't met, there's like service credits and stuff. So it's actually, it's very inexpensive. The other thing is, you're talking about agility and professionalism. I mean, there's safety in numbers. Like if you're using open standards and you're using a well-known implementation, there's a lot of other companies using that. So we're constantly testing, we're constantly hammering on these things from a pen test perspective. If you build it yourself, there is this risk of incarceration, as Todd put it. Like you've got this risk that you're taking, and you might have some expert people, but 5 or 6 people working on one of these programs is not the same as like an entire company that's focused on that thing. So I think that there's safety in doing it, and then there's the efficiency of doing it, and those are the two like reasons. Now, as far as how you explain it to like your stakeholders, I think, Todd, that's perfect for you, right? I mean, the assessment is designed to do that, right? You want to expose those issues. So please.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes it's a fear factor approach. I hate to say it. Again, if they're looking for the ROI, it's sometimes hard to show, because they feel, for whatever reason, when they're looking at these numbers, that, oh, that's going to cost me more than, our legacy spaghetti coated mess that we've put into place right now in the organization, which we can never really upgrade everything we want to upgrade, because it will break everything, either upstream, downstream, or somewhere in the middle here. But that's the biggest headache. And if that breaks, we're out of business. Not just that we're out of business towards our customer, but we may be opening the door for that other ROI, right? And that's the key piece. Sometimes you just have to keep it very high level in that. If you go down the weeds and say, look, we got a multi-tenant cloud environment where we want to make sure that we have our authorization policies going down to the microservice transaction layer, their eyes are going to gloss over. So if you come at it too technical, you're going to run into that same brick wall. They're not going to understand. You really have to just baseline it and give them a very basic explanation. Even if they're the CISO or CIO, still go basic and say, hey, look, we've got this mess. It is, held together with tape and bubble gum at times. And the problem is going to be that this newer technology, this newer standards out that we are going from a regulation standpoint to have to implement, and we are in no position right now to do so. Maybe that basic. And then to let them know, look, a fine could be $5,000. It could be $5 million. We don't know until the fine comes in. And sometimes, again, the fear factor is how you do it. There's a wonderful site, by the way, called informationisbeautiful.net. Highly recommend taking a look at it. They love to publish in big bubbles everybody's hack that has taken place in the market. And that's scary. You don't want to be on that list. And they give all the details around it, and you can see every hack that has occurred over, really, at this point, I think they go back almost 20 years. You don't want to be on that list. That, again, that's the fear aspect that sometimes has to be brought in because it is a different method of ROI. And they have to know it's not always an upfront cost or upfront savings. It's what's going to happen when your picture's in the news to the brand or to you.
Reputational risk. Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. Thanks, Todd. So next one, how to prevent shadow identity silos across different departments or geographies while implementing CIAM across global platforms. Why don't you start on that one? We'll
Sure. Well, again, that's the other piece of this assessment that I like to bring up because part one of that is identification. We need to identify these right up front. Too many orgs, when they try this, they come out with sort of an app spec type model. They send to the different application owners, for example, that are out there, answer these questions, and then they hold their hand a little, but they're not getting that kind of depth, that kind of data that when you actually do a Teams meeting or something and you're speaking to them, that's when you find out the real stories. And that's how you're going to find these out where they exist because people let things slip. And you want to open the door to let them say whatever they want to say and say, look, here's your chance. Let us know what you're thinking. And suddenly you're identifying all these things. Oh, well, what do you know? There's this technology we didn't even know was into play. Goes against everything from a policy and procedure standpoint that we're just horrible at enforcing that's out there. That's how you do that identification. And it is not simple. There are technologies that will go out, but you're only going to get so much because it's only what you can point it at that you even know about. And I've seen some organizations that didn't even realize till late in the game that there was some siloed site out there running something they completely forgot about because they had gone through this process or procedure. And what do you know? We put new technology in and the point of sale system at that particular one or two offsites there suddenly went down and everybody's scrambling and heads are going to roll. So identify through contacting these groups, identifying them, contacting them, and speaking to them. I'll hand it back to you, Brooke.
Sure. Yeah, so we're a little low on time. There's a fair few questions here left. So the next two I think are kind of related. So I'll read them both. The first one is, when integrating MFA in a CIAM environment, how can we avoid authentication fatigue or abandonment rates from end users while still maintaining strong security posture? The next question is, what's your approach to resolving the ongoing tension between frictionless CX and stringent identity assurance in a CIAM strategy? So these are not exactly the same question, but my answer is pretty much the same for both of them. And the answer is that you have to be taking a dynamic approach to analyzing risk, right? So you can maintain a strict security posture and reduce friction by ensuring that you're analyzing the actual risk context under which the user is operating. And you can reduce the friction when things are good, but when things are bad, you have to increase it. And it doesn't have to be absolutely negative, right? If you buy a pair of socks every 3 months from London, and then you buy a mattress for 5,000 euros and you're sitting in Paris when you do that, like that's kind of weird. We probably want to introduce some friction there before we allow you to make that purchase, right? It's not it's not you, it's that we need to be more careful because now you're spending 100 times as much money and you're buying something that you've never bought before, right? And that's a retail case. But there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And I think that ML is the way we do that, right? We build models about user behavior, about community behavior, and that's kind of how you approach that. But in general, it's about dynamic risk. So I don't know if you have anything you want to quickly add there, and then we can.
I know we got a couple more. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I'll mark those as answered. All right. Last, or there's two more. How should product teams think about CIAM differently from enterprise IAM with more orgs embedding identity into digital products? You want to go on that? Take that one.
You can go if you want to, just because I know we only got a minute left.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think that CIAM has different characteristics in that you're dealing with users where you don't have control over their device. So I think that the fundamental thing is like the core technologies are the same, but you have different constraints. You can't control what browser grandma's using to access your system. You can dictate what machine, what browser, what device your employees use. So you have a different set of tools available to you. And I think that's probably the biggest way to differentiate between these two things. Now, there is this fuzzy line between B2B and B2C and B2B2C and so on. You have like users who are not inside your org and you can't dictate their devices and so on, but you can make security requirements as part of that partnership. And I think that understanding what the constraints are and what you can dictate versus what you can't and what you can expect versus what you can't is pretty critical there. So that's how I would approach that one.
Hey, Brooke, maybe we want to skip this one and do a quick wrap up, and we'll just maybe we'll send out the answer to everybody that is attended, and then if you're watching this on a repeat mode, feel free to reach out. Our contact info is in this presentation, so if you look long enough, you'll find it. I do want to leave on our side one quick thing. We have complimentary workshops on this where we will spend the day with you, maybe even 2 days with you, where we will you just contact us and we will set it up, where we'll come in either remotely or on site. We'll spend a day whiteboarding with you from your current state to what you need in the future and how to get there. And we do this as a complimentary thing for organizations that reach out to us. Again, that's todd.rossin@techdemocracy.com or info@techdemocracy.com. And we have a couple different ways to get that out to you. So if you reach out, again, we will do those complimentary workshops with you to get you in a better place. And then maybe, Brooke, I'll leave it with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can reach us directly. The website is secureauth.com. There's direct contact on there. My personal email address is blovett@secureauth.com. Please reach out if you need anything. I think Todd's workshop would be very valuable, and certainly we're supporting them, and we look forward to hearing from you all. So, thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.